The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, broadcast into every major communication network on the planet at the same time. There was no warning before it. One moment the screens showed the news, the weather, and old reruns of talk shows. The next moment, every screen on Earth showed the same thing. A tall, thin alien figure standing in front of a golden symbol, speaking in a calm and steady voice. The alien introduced itself as a representative of the Galactic Council, a group of many different species that had been traveling among the stars for thousands of years. It said that Earth had been watched for a long time, and that humanity was now being given a choice. The Council listed its demands one by one. Earth had to give up its weapons. Earth had to hand over control of its solar system's resources to Council officers. Earth had to accept what the alien called guided integration, which really meant accepting Council rules and Council leaders. If Earth refused, the planet would be cut off from all future contact and placed under heavy sanctions. 30 days were given to decide. Across the planet, people stopped what they were doing and stared at their screens. In offices, kitchens, schools, and military bases, the same image played again and again. Within an hour, the leaders of every major nation were called into emergency meetings. Phones rang nonstop. News channels argued over whether this was real or some kind of trick. But by the end of the day, satellite data confirmed it. Something large, far larger than anything built by human hands, was sitting quietly at the edge of the solar system. It was real. In an underground bunker beneath Geneva, leaders from more than 30 countries gathered around a long table. For the first time in human history, nations that had argued for centuries sat together to decide one thing: how to answer the Galactic Council. Many expected panic. Some military officers expected calls for surrender. Instead, something strange happened. The mood in the room was calm. A few people were even smiling. An old general from Russia leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "They think this is our first ultimatum." A few people laughed softly. It wasn't because the threat wasn't serious. It was because humanity had been here before, just with smaller, more familiar enemies. Threats, deadlines, demands backed by force. These were not new ideas to a species that had survived world wars, cold wars, and centuries of conflict between its own nations. The aliens were offering 30 days and conditions. Humanity's history was full of moments where far less time had been given, and far worse odds had been faced. A young diplomat from Kenya stood up and pointed at the screen, still replaying the alien's message. "They didn't even ask us anything," she said. "They told us what to do, like we don't have a say. That tells me something about how they think of us." The room grew quiet as people considered her words. The Council's message wasn't really a negotiation. It was an order, delivered with the calm tone of someone speaking to a child. Military officers from several countries exchanged files showing recent unexplained events, strange lights near satellites, brief radio interference that no one could explain, and sensor readings from deep space probes that had gone silent without warning. At the time, these things were dismissed as technical glitches or natural phenomena. Now, looking at them again, many in the room wondered if Earth had already been watched far longer than 30 days, maybe for years. A scientist from Japan spoke next. She explained that based on the size and shape of the object near the solar system's edge, and the technology needed to broadcast a message instantly to every screen on Earth, the Council was clearly far more advanced than humanity. There would be no way to fight them directly with current weapons. But she also pointed out something important. The Council's message focused only on Earth's weapons and resources. It said nothing about Earth's industries, its information networks, its scientists, or its ability to adapt quickly. It was a list written by someone who saw humanity only as a problem to control, not as a species worth understanding. For hours, the leaders debated. Some wanted to send an immediate request for more time. Others wanted to show strength by activating every military system at once, even knowing it would do little against such advanced technology. A few worried that any reply at all might provoke faster punishment. But slowly, a different idea began to form, championed first by a small group of diplomats and writers brought in for their skill with words rather than weapons. Instead of fear, instead of begging, instead of threats that humanity couldn't back up, why not respond the way humans often responded to demands they had no intention of following with politeness? A reply that sounded calm, friendly, even grateful, but firmly said no to every single point. Not a surrender, not a declaration of war. Something in between, something that would confuse an enemy used to fear or anger. The idea spread through the room slowly, then quickly. A general who had spent decades studying old diplomatic letters smiled and said it reminded him of letters written between rival kings centuries ago, full of polite words hiding sharp warnings underneath. A famous Earth saying was mentioned: "Kill them with kindness." Several leaders laughed, but the laughter had an edge of seriousness to it. If the council expected fear, giving them confusion instead might buy valuable time. By midnight, a small team of writers, historians, and diplomats had been chosen to draft Earth's first official reply to an alien civilization. They worked through the night, rewriting line after line, trying to find the right tone. It needed to sound sincere. It needed to sound calm. And underneath all of that, it needed to carry a quiet warning that Earth was not as helpless as the Council believed. Outside the bunker, the rest of the world waited anxiously for news. Many believed their leaders would simply agree to whatever was demanded, just to avoid disaster. Few imagined that, behind closed doors, the people in charge were carefully writing something far stranger than a surrender. They were writing a thank you note. As dawn approached, the draft was finally finished. It was short, polite, and oddly warm in tone, almost like a letter thanking a stranger for advice no one had asked for. Some who read it worried it sounded too soft, too weak. Others worried it sounded too bold, hiding too much beneath its kind words. But everyone agreed on one thing. It was unlike anything the Galactic Council had likely ever received before. As the leaders prepared to send their reply into space, none of them knew exactly how the Council would react. They only knew that humanity's answer would not be silence, and it would not be surrender. It would be something far more unexpected, something the Council, for all its power and history, had clearly never seen coming. The message left Earth at dawn, sent through every transmitter humanity could point toward the strange object sitting at the edge of the solar system. It traveled silently through space, carrying words that no one on the sending end was fully sure would land the right way. Back in the bunker beneath Geneva, the leaders who had stayed up all night now sat in tired silence, watching a screen that showed nothing but a blinking signal marker. There was nothing left to do but wait. Far away, aboard the massive council ship hovering quietly near Earth's solar system, the reply was received by a team of analysts whose job was simply to process responses from lesser species. Most replies they had seen from new worlds followed familiar patterns, pleading for mercy, demanding more time, or occasionally threatening resistance that the council knew would fail before it even began. The analysts expected one of these three. What they got was none of them. The message that appeared on their screens began with a warm greeting. It thanked the Council for taking the time to study Earth so carefully. It complimented the clear and organized way the demands had been presented. Then, point by point, it politely declined every single one. Weapons would not be surrendered, the note explained, because Earth still found use for them in matters the Council had clearly not considered. Control of the solar system's resources would also not be handed over, since humanity still had ongoing plans for them. As for guided integration, the note explained, with what almost felt like gentle humor, that humanity appreciated the offer but preferred to continue making its own mistakes for now. The first analyst to read it called it a translation error. The system was checked twice. The second analyst suggested it might be sarcasm, a joke meant to insult the Council. A senior officer was called in immediately. He read the message carefully, his expression unreadable, and ordered a full review of every word. It was during this review that things became stranger. Buried in small notes at the bottom of the message, almost like footnotes in an old letter, were several offhand comments. One thanked the Council for the chance to study its scout ships, calling the experience educational. Another casually mentioned that several patrol drones near the edge of the solar system had stopped transmitting recently, and politely apologized if this caused any confusion. A third simply noted that Earth scientists had learned a great deal from analyzing debris found drifting near one of the outer planets. None of these comments made direct threats. None of them admitted to anything Earth could later be blamed for, but together they painted a picture that deeply unsettled anyone reading closely. If true, it meant Earth already knew about Council ships that had quietly entered the solar system before the official ultimatum was even sent. It meant some of those ships had gone missing or been studied without the Council's full knowledge. And it meant Earth had learned something from the wreckage, something the Council had never intended to share. A senior counselor known simply as Elder Vren, a veteran of many first encounters between his own ancient species and younger worlds, was brought the message personally. He read it twice in complete silence. Around him, younger officers buzzed with theories about whether humanity was bluffing, mocking, or simply foolish. Vren said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked a single question. Had any of the Council's earlier scout missions near Earth ever failed to report back? The room grew quiet. After some searching, an officer admitted that 3 small scout probes sent to monitor Earth months earlier had, in fact, gone silent without explanation. At the time, this had been blamed on equipment failure, since young species were rarely considered advanced enough to interfere with Council technology. Vren listened carefully, then said something that made several officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. He said the tone of the message reminded him of letters written by old, cautious civilizations he had encountered earlier in his long career, species that spoke gently not because they were weak, but because they had already calculated the cost of war and decided, for now, that peace was simply more convenient. Not everyone agreed with him. A younger officer, eager to prove himself, argued that this was exactly the kind of trick a desperate species would use. Humanity, he said, clearly knew it could not fight the Council directly, so it was trying to create doubt and fear using nothing but clever words. He suggested sending a small fleet, not to attack, but to demonstrate the Council's power and remind Earth of the consequences of refusal. Several other officers agreed, eager to restore the natural order where younger species respected their elders in the galaxy. Elder Vren disagreed, but he was outvoted. The decision was made to send a modest peacekeeping fleet toward Earth, large enough to show strength, but with strict orders to avoid direct attack unless provoked. The goal was simple: remind Earth who truly held power in this conversation, and pressure the planet into reconsidering its strange, polite refusal. Back on Earth, news of the Council's silence after the message was sent only added to the tension. Some leaders worried that no immediate reply meant an attack was already being planned. Others took the silence as a good sign, believing that confusion bought valuable time. Public reaction across the planet was mixed. Some praised the bold and clever tone of the message once parts of it were leaked to the press, turning the unnamed writers into instant heroes online. Others criticized the leaders for playing games with a species that could destroy Earth without effort. Then, 3 days after the message was sent, sensors detected movement. A formation of ships, smaller than the original Council vessel but still far larger than anything Earth had ever built, began approaching the solar system. Military officers across the world were put on alert. Fighter jets, satellites, and tracking systems focused entirely on the approaching fleet. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but everyone understood that the next move belonged to the Council, and Earth's calm, polite defiance was about to be tested for the first time. In the same Geneva bunker where the message had been written, the same group of leaders gathered once again. The mood this time was tense, but oddly steady. The diplomat from Kenya, who had spoken so plainly during the first meeting, looked around the room and asked a simple question. Had anyone expected the council to simply accept no for an answer? No one had. This had always been expected as just the first step, not the end of the conversation. A military commander reminded everyone that the orders given days earlier still stood. No weapons would be fired first. No aggressive action would be taken unless the council attacked directly. Earth's strength, for now, would come from patience, preparation, and quiet defenses already put in place long before this crisis began. Defenses few outside select military and scientific circles even knew existed. As the council's fleet drew closer, calculations were checked one final time. Communication systems were tested. Hidden defense networks, built quietly over years under the cover of ordinary satellite projects, were brought online without any public announcement. Earth's leaders did not know exactly what would happen when the fleet arrived, but they knew one thing clearly. Whatever came next would not be a simple victory for the Council, and whatever the outcome, the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's polite words had not been empty ones. The Council fleet entered the edge of the solar system on a clear morning, though no one on Earth could see the ships with their own eyes. Only powerful telescopes and sensors picked up their movement, dozens of large shapes gliding silently past the outer planets. News of their arrival spread quickly, and within hours, almost every person on the planet knew that the moment of testing had finally come. Inside the lead Council ship, a young commander named Threlk studied the readings of the solar system ahead. He had been chosen to lead this mission because of his careful nature and his record of avoiding unnecessary conflict during earlier first contact missions with smaller worlds. His orders were clear. Show strength. Make Earth understand the size of the gap between their power and the Council's. Do not attack unless attacked first. Force a different answer. Threlk expected this to be simple. In his experience, even species that resisted at first usually surrendered quickly once they saw real military power approaching their home. He had seen it happen many times before, sometimes within hours of a fleet's arrival. As the fleet moved closer, the first strange signs appeared. Routine communication checks between ships began arriving late, sometimes garbled, sometimes slightly delayed in ways that made no logical sense given the simple distances involved. At first, technicians blamed natural interference from the sun or unusual readings from unfamiliar parts of space. But the problems grew worse the closer the fleet came to Earth. One smaller support ship reported a sudden and unexplained shift in its navigation system, causing it to drift slightly off its planned course. Engineers checked every system twice and found nothing wrong with the hardware itself. It was as if the information feeding into the system had simply been wrong, though no clear source of the error could be found. Another ship reported a brief loss of contact with the main fleet for several minutes, only to reconnect normally afterward with no explanation for the gap. None of these events were dramatic enough to alarm the entire fleet at first. Commander Threlk dismissed them as ordinary technical issues, the kind that often appeared when traveling near unfamiliar stars and unknown planetary defenses. He pressed the fleet forward, eager to complete the mission quickly and report success back to the Council leadership. Then came the incident with the reactor. One of the larger support vessels, responsible for carrying additional weapons systems, suddenly reported a serious malfunction deep within its main reactor. Warning lights flashed across its control room as power levels became unstable. The crew worked quickly to stabilize the situation, eventually managing to shut the reactor down safely before any real damage occurred. The ship was left stranded, unable to move under its own power, though otherwise undamaged and with no injuries reported among its crew. What confused Threlk and his engineers most was not that the malfunction happened, but how perfectly controlled it seemed. The reactor had not exploded. It had not caused harm to the crew. It had simply stopped working at exactly the right moment to disable the ship without endangering it. When engineers later reviewed the data, they found patterns suggesting the failure had been triggered by an outside signal, something far too precise to be a random technical fault, yet impossible to trace back to any clear source. Word of the incident spread quickly through the fleet. Crews who had once felt completely secure aboard their advanced ships now found themselves checking their systems nervously, wondering if their own vessel might be the next one targeted in such a quiet, careful way. No weapons had been fired. No ship had been destroyed. Yet the sense of control the fleet once held over the situation had clearly begun to slip. Elder Vren, who had remained behind on the main council vessel further out in space, received reports of these events with growing concern. He requested a private channel with Commander Threlk and warned him directly. He reminded the young commander of the strange politeness in Earth's earlier message, the quiet confidence behind its calm refusal. He suggested that what the fleet was experiencing now was not random bad luck, but a careful demonstration, designed specifically to avoid open violence while still proving a clear point. Earth was showing the Council exactly how much control it actually had, without ever pulling a trigger. Threlk was reluctant to accept this idea fully. Admitting that a newly discovered, technologically simpler species could disable Council ships without firing a single shot felt almost impossible to believe. He ordered increased caution, but refused to retreat, still believing that pressing forward and demonstrating raw firepower would eventually force Earth's leaders to back down. On Earth, far below the unfolding events in space, military leaders monitored the situation closely from secret command centers. Reports of the disabled Council ship reached them quickly through quiet defense networks built over years under ordinary-sounding government projects. There was no celebration in the command rooms, no cheering or excitement. Instead, there was careful, focused attention, as engineers and officers worked to ensure everything continued exactly as planned, with no unnecessary escalation. A senior officer overseeing the operation reminded their team of the central goal. The objective was never to destroy the Council fleet or start open war. It was to demonstrate clearly but quietly that Earth was not an easy target, while still leaving every door open for peaceful conversation. Disabling a single ship without harming its crew was meant to send exactly that message: capability without cruelty, strength without unnecessary violence. Meanwhile, public reaction across Earth grew louder, as parts of the story leaked through unofficial channels and rumors. Many doubted the claims at first, assuming they were exaggerated stories meant to calm public fear. Governments neither confirmed nor denied the details fully, choosing instead to keep official statements vague while quietly allowing rumors to spread. The mixture of mystery and quiet confidence began shifting public mood from fear toward cautious pride. Back near the edge of the solar system, Commander Threlk faced a difficult decision. His superiors expected results, yet pressing further risked more unexplained failures within his own fleet. Pulling back too soon might be seen as weakness, exactly the kind of outcome the Council could not afford after issuing such a confident ultimatum. He requested updated instructions from Council leadership, uncertain for the first time in his career exactly what action would lead to success. Elder Vren, watching from a distance, understood something that many of his fellow officers still refused to accept. Earth had not won this confrontation through overwhelming force. It had won, so far, through patience, precision, and careful restraint, exactly the qualities the Council itself valued in older, wiser civilizations. The galaxy had arrived expecting to meet a frightened, primitive species ready to surrender. Instead, it found something far more difficult to predict: a young species clearly capable of calculating risks carefully and acting with quiet confidence rather than panic. As reports of the standoff reached Council leadership far beyond the solar system, a deeper, more serious debate began to form, one that would soon force the entire council to reconsider not just its demands, but its understanding of Earth itself. News of the disabled ship spread far beyond Commander Threlk's fleet. Within hours, word reached the Galactic Council's main governing chamber, located on a massive space station that had served as the seat of power for thousands of years. For the first time since the ultimatum had been issued, the calm certainty that had filled the chamber began to crack. The council was made up of representatives from many different species, each with their own history, their own customs, and their own opinions about younger worlds. Some had joined the council centuries ago, after long and difficult periods of conflict before finally accepting peace. Others had been welcomed more gently, guided carefully into galactic society without much resistance. Earth's situation, however, was unlike anything most of them had dealt with directly. A formal session was called to discuss what was now being referred to simply as the Earth situation. Representatives filled the chamber, some calm, some visibly frustrated. The first to speak was a senior counselor from a species known for its military history, who argued strongly that the council could not allow a single disabled ship to shake its authority. He insisted that stronger action was needed immediately, perhaps a larger fleet, perhaps a clear show of overwhelming force to remind Earth, and indeed every species watching closely, that the council's words still carried weight. Other counselors disagreed. A representative from a quieter, more cautious species pointed out that no council lives had been lost. No real act of war had occurred. Disabling a ship without harming its crew, she argued, was not the action of a desperate or panicked species. It was closer to a calculated warning, carefully measured to avoid permanent damage to the relationship between both sides. Elder Vren, finally given the chance to speak directly to the full council rather than just his fleet commander, stood slowly and addressed the chamber. He reminded everyone present of the original message Earth had sent, the strange combination of politeness and quiet confidence running through every line. He explained that in his long career, he had encountered only a handful of species that spoke this way during moments of crisis, and almost all of them had turned out to be far more capable than they first appeared. He suggested something many in the room did not want to hear. Perhaps Earth was not refusing the Council's demands out of foolish pride or desperation. Perhaps Earth had simply calculated, carefully and clearly, that accepting the Council's terms would cost more than risking its current quiet defiance. If that was true, the situation could not be solved through threats and shows of force alone. It would require real understanding, real negotiation, treating Earth not as a problem to be controlled, but as an equal party with its own reasoning. This idea sparked heated debate. Several counselors found it almost insulting to suggest that a species so new to galactic contact could be considered an equal to civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. Others, especially those who had read detailed reports about the disabled ship and the strange technical failures throughout the fleet, found themselves reluctantly agreeing with Vren's caution. While the council argued, additional information arrived from deep space monitoring stations near Earth. Analysts had finally finished studying the wreckage Earth's message had mentioned earlier, fragments of an old council probe that had vanished months before the ultimatum was even issued. Careful examination showed clear signs that the probe had been deliberately disabled and partially taken apart, not destroyed carelessly, but studied with surprising precision. Internal components showed signs of careful handling, almost respectful in nature, as if whoever examined it had been more interested in understanding the technology than destroying it out of fear or anger. This discovery shifted the tone of the debate further. If true, it meant Earth had been quietly studying Council technology for some time before any official contact had even occurred, learning from it patiently rather than reacting with panic once finally noticed. It suggested a level of preparation and calm thinking that unsettled even the counselors who had pushed hardest for stronger military action. Commander Threlk, still waiting near Earth's solar system with his fleet, eventually received updated orders. Rather than escalating further, he was instructed to hold his position and avoid any further provocation while the council debated next steps. The order frustrated some of his crew, who felt humiliated by the earlier reactor failure and eager to prove the fleet's strength. Others, especially after witnessing the strange precision of the failures firsthand, felt quiet relief at the chance to avoid further unexplained incidents. Back on Earth, leaders watched closely as council ships remained still near the edge of the solar system, no longer advancing, no longer retreating. Intelligence analysts interpreted this pause as a strong sign that the council was reconsidering its approach rather than simply preparing for a larger attack. Still, no one allowed themselves to relax completely. Quiet defense preparations continued exactly as before, with engineers and scientists carefully monitoring for any sign of renewed aggression. During this tense pause, a new development emerged from an unexpected source. A retired council diplomat, long out of active service but respected for her wisdom, requested permission to speak directly with Earth's leaders, separate from the official military and political channels. After careful internal discussion, the council agreed to allow limited contact, partly out of curiosity, partly out of growing uncertainty about how else to move forward without triggering further unexpected consequences. The diplomat, whose name was Salen, transmitted a short, simple message to Earth, deliberately different in tone from the original ultimatum. She did not repeat threats or demands. Instead, she expressed genuine curiosity about Earth's reasoning, asking calmly why humanity had chosen such an unusual way to respond to the Council's original message. She made it clear that this was not an official negotiation, simply an attempt to understand. Earth's leaders debated carefully before responding. Some worried that any extra communication might reveal weaknesses or strategies better left hidden. Others argued that this represented exactly the kind of opening they had hoped for from the beginning, a chance to explain Earth's position honestly, without panic, without unnecessary boasting, simply as one civilization speaking plainly to another. After careful discussion, Earth sent a brief reply through the same official channel used for the original thank you note. It explained simply that humanity had faced countless difficult challenges throughout its history, and through painful experience, had learned that demands made without real understanding often led to far worse outcomes for everyone involved. Earth's leaders explained that they preferred honest disagreement over forced agreement, even if it meant taking on greater risk in the short term. The simple honesty of this message struck Salen deeply when she received it. She presented it to the wider council, framing it not as defiance, but as a genuine philosophical difference in how Earth approached difficult situations. Slowly, cautiously, opinions within the council began shifting once again, not toward immediate trust, but toward a careful willingness to consider a different approach altogether, one based on conversation rather than control. As both sides paused to reconsider their next moves, it became increasingly clear that neither full surrender nor full-scale war would settle this situation easily. Something new would have to be built between Earth and the Galactic Council, something neither side had originally expected when this strange standoff first began. Weeks passed before the Council finally agreed on a clear path forward. The earlier debates, full of anger and pride, slowly gave way to a quieter and more careful approach. Too much evidence had piled up to ignore. A disabled ship left unharmed, a studied probe handled with surprising care, a message that refused every demand without a single threatening word. Whatever Earth was, it was not the helpless, frightened species the Council had first expected to deal with. Elder Vren was given the task of leading a small diplomatic team toward Earth, this time without warships, without demands, and without a countdown. Commander Threlk's fleet was ordered to withdraw slightly, no longer positioned as a show of force, but simply remaining nearby as a quiet, neutral presence. The shift was small, but everyone on both sides understood its meaning. The council was no longer trying to control the conversation. It was trying to actually have one. On Earth, news of the council's change in approach spread quickly. Public reaction shifted from anxious waiting to cautious hope. People who had spent weeks fearing sudden destruction now allowed themselves small moments of relief, though leaders reminded everyone that the situation remained delicate. Diplomats from around the world prepared carefully for the upcoming meeting, knowing that whatever happened next would shape humanity's place among the stars for generations to come. The meeting took place aboard a neutral platform built quickly in orbit above Earth, designed jointly by human engineers, and a small council team sent ahead to assist. It was a strange, symbolic space, blending simple human design with smoother, more advanced council technology, neither side fully in control of the environment, exactly as intended. Elder Vren arrived personally, choosing to lead the discussion himself rather than send a lower-ranking official. Facing him sat a small group of Earth's most trusted diplomats, including the same young woman from Kenya who had spoken so plainly during the very first emergency meeting weeks earlier. Her calm honesty back then had helped shape Earth's entire approach, and her presence now felt fitting as both sides prepared to speak as equals for the first time. Vren opened the conversation simply, without grand speeches or formal demands. He admitted, openly and without excuses, that the Council had misjudged Earth from the very beginning, assuming too quickly that a new species must automatically be weaker, less experienced, and less capable of careful thought simply because it was unfamiliar with life beyond its own planet. He explained that this mistake was not new among older civilizations, but it was one the Council needed to address honestly if any real trust was going to be built. Earth's diplomats listened carefully before responding. They acknowledged Earth's own mistakes as well, including the quiet decision to study Council technology without official permission before contact had even occurred. They explained, honestly, that years of internal human conflict had taught hard lessons about the dangers of assuming too much about unfamiliar groups, whether nations, cultures, or now, entirely different species. Rather than reacting purely out of fear, Earth had chosen careful preparation, even if that meant operating quietly outside normal diplomatic boundaries before any formal relationship existed. The conversation continued for hours, covering far more than just the original ultimatum. Topics ranged from history and conflict to science, culture, and the simple curiosity both sides shared about each other's worlds. Slowly, formal negotiation gave way to something closer to honest conversation between representatives, genuinely trying to understand one another, rather than simply trying to win an argument. By the end of the meeting, no harsh demands remained on the table. Instead, both sides agreed to a new, much simpler framework. Earth would not be forced to disarm or surrender control of its resources. In exchange, Earth agreed to open limited, carefully chosen channels of communication and cooperation with the Council, allowing both sides to learn from each other gradually, without forced integration or sudden, overwhelming change to either civilization's way of life. It was not a perfect agreement. Some on both sides remained uneasy, unsure whether deeper trust could ever fully develop between such different worlds. Yet it represented something far more valuable than either total victory or total surrender, a starting point built on honesty rather than fear. News of the agreement spread quickly across both Earth and the wider Council territories. On Earth, celebrations were modest but heartfelt, marked more by quiet relief than wild celebration. People understood that the larger journey, learning to live alongside an entire galaxy of unfamiliar civilizations, had only just begun. Across Council space, reactions were more mixed, with some species genuinely curious about Earth's unusual path to recognition, while others remained skeptical, watching carefully to see whether humanity's calm confidence would hold steady over time. Commander Threlk, reflecting later on the events that had unfolded, admitted privately to Elder Vren that he had learned an important lesson from the experience. Strength, he realized, was not always measured by the size of one's fleet or the power of one's weapons. Sometimes it was measured by patience, careful thought, and the willingness to respond to pressure without losing control of one's own decisions. Elder Vren simply nodded, having understood this lesson long before the young commander arrived at it himself. He had seen many young species rise and fall throughout his long career, some destroyed by their own fear, others by their own pride. Earth, he believed, had avoided both traps, not through overwhelming power, but through quiet confidence built on hard-earned experience. Far below, on the planet that had so unexpectedly captured the attention of an entire galaxy, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Schools resumed lessons that now included basic information about the wider galaxy. Scientists eagerly began preparing for future, carefully managed exchanges of knowledge with council representatives. Military leaders continued their quiet work, aware that peace, while welcome, required constant attention rather than blind trust. The story of Earth's first contact with the Galactic Council eventually became a well-known piece of history, taught and retold for generations. It was remembered not simply as a tale of humanity facing down a powerful enemy, but as a reminder of something deeper, that real strength often comes not from anger or fear, but from patience, honesty, and the quiet confidence of a species that has already faced its own darkest moments and found a way through them together. And so, what began as a simple thank you note, written quietly through a long and uncertain night, marked not the end of humanity's troubles, but the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one written carefully, deliberately, and on humanity's own terms.